Hello everyone, my name is Nasser Abad. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of the Aga Khan Program. And welcome to our last lecture of the semester. Please keep an eye for our activities for next year. We're planning hopefully an exciting lecture series. We also are planning an exhibit and at least one conference for next academic year. The only thing that I know about is the exhibit because I'm the one planning it, and it's on the dead cities in Syria, a collection of villages and towns from the Roman and the Byzantine period that are the only complete rural example of antique architecture that we have anywhere in the world. Not even in Italy do they have anything compared to it. Today our last lecturer, since I'm starting to speak about the Roman, is a descendant of the Romans, Roberto Fabbri. His title is actually very indicative of who he is, because Roberto Fabbri is an academic nomad of sorts. He had studied in Italy, got his 2 degrees from 2 universities that are about an hour away from each other, Florence and Bologna. And then he worked in countries as varied as Mexico, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. And he is now here with us as an Aga Khan Program postdoctoral fellow here in Cambridge. Roberto is an architect, researcher, and currently associate professor at Zayed University's College of Arts and Creative Enterprises in United Arab Emirates. He graduated cum laude from the University of Florence and received his PhD in architecture from the University of Bologna. He was a faculty member at the Department of Arts, Architecture and Design at the University of Monterrey in Mexico, where he was also a member of the Claustro Academico before joining Zayed University. He served as an architectural consultant for the United Nations Development Program, where he contributed to rehabilitating museum and exhibition spaces, including the Kuwait National Museum, designed by our friend Michel Ecochard, and transforming the former American Missionary Hospital of Kuwait into a cultural hub, Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyya, where I had the honor of giving 2 or 3 lectures over the years, and it's actually really a wonderful place to be in. Roberto later co-designed 15 exhibitions spanning the ancient Islamic artifacts in As-Sabah collection to contemporary calligraphy, architecture, and photography. Fabri's research interests focus on narrative spaces and the role of heritage and architecture in modernization, nation building, and identity making, with an emphasis on the Gulf. He received research grants from numerous foundations and presented his works at various international conferences and universities. He has published extensively in architectural magazines and academic journals, served on editorial board of architectural histories and the International Board of Reviewers for the International Journal of Architectural Research. He has authored 2 books on Max Bill and the architectural relations between Italy and Switzerland between the 2 world wars. This is like his earlier life, before he became the nomad that he is today. More recently, he co-authored the indispensable double-volume Modern Architecture in Kuwait from 1949 to 1989, which actually is really a major work. It's an exemplary book of how you can study modern architecture in countries in which archives are not easily findable, and where you can collect your information. And he has done really a prodigious work in providing the information for generations to come who would want to study the modern architecture of Kuwait. His latest publication, Urban Modernity in the Contemporary Gulf, co-edited with Sultan Saud al-Qasimi, offers a discussion on architectural production in the modernization era in the Arabian Peninsula, reflecting on the initiatives that recently re-engaged with the once ville moderne, which meanwhile lost its pivotal function and meaning. His talk today, Nomadic Narratives, Architectural Transplants, explores Abu Dhabi's ongoing urban transformation, focusing on Saadiyat Island's cultural plan, where we have 4 mega museums under construction and 1 already in function and 1 complete university, American university, the NYU Abu Dhabi. And the focus of the lecture, of course, is on the country's strategies for a post-oil economy that depends very much on tourism and education. Please join me in welcoming Roberto.
Is this working? Hello, hello? Can you hear me?
Disconnecting from the live right here.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks to Nasser for the introduction. I'm humbled. And for the invitation this semester as well. Uma, thank you for having me here. And also thanks, Diana, for promoting the event tonight. You've been very, very helpful. So today I'm sharing an ongoing project that I began a few years ago after relocating to Abu Dhabi, and I've been reorganizing into a possible publication during this semester at ACPIA. This work explores Abu Dhabi's ongoing urban transformation as a cultural project. It focuses on Saadiyat Island's cultural plans in relation to the country's vision for a post-oil economy. In early 2000s, Saadiyat offered an investment opportunity for upscale residential land and a tourist attraction anchored by renowned museum architecture. So at this stage, the curatorial programs existed more as intentions than fully realized concepts. Therefore, architects were tasked with translating these intentions into tangible forms, imbuing semantic meanings into architectural shapes. Architecture emerged as the chosen language, evoking an idealized past in response to a fluid context in constant adjustment along the East-West tradition-modernity axis. To corroborate this idea, local nomadic narratives were revitalized and global architects mobilized. The Gulf and its waterways share a long history of importing materials, technology, and expertise, sometimes even entire buildings. Therefore, previous scholarly works build upon the notion of mobility, transnational, and transfer. This work explores the idea of a transplant, implying that, despite foreign origins, architectural element can take root in a new context, establishing new relationship and acquiring new meaning. In doing so, the work questions the notion of context. It challenges the idea of a tabula rasa, too often associated with the Gulf city transformation. Instead, it delves into the pre-existing conditions that architects, clients, and developers choose to utilize, reinterpret, or deliberately ignore. This work not only seeks to analyze why this process occurs, but also aims to understand how it unfolds. In other words, it studies how narratives are constructed alongside the physical structures. It reflects on how the Saadiyat project has evolved beyond shaping a new urban fabric, now defining the city brandscape, and contributing to the national identity consolidation in a country characterized by an articulated and unbalanced demographic. So in 1974, boxing legend and civil rights activist Muhammad Ali visited the newly established UAE. Archival snapshots like this one capture him being accompanied by a local delegation to a flat island off the Abu Dhabi's coast, where a few greenhouses experiment with hydroponic cultivation amid the dunes. Leap forward 5 decades and a whirlwind of master plans and architectural concepts, those very sands are transforming into one of the world's largest cultural districts and a real estate venture. To give you an idea of the size of this transformation, Saadiyat Island is as big as Cambridge and Somerville combined, or half of Manhattan Island. In 2006, the Abu Dhabi Tourism Authority commissioned Gensler to draft the first strategic master plan for Saadiyat. The island, a vast underdeveloped territory facing the northwest edge of the capital center, offered an appealing solution to the city's rapid growth, only a few new bridges away from the administrative center. Now, for those who are not familiar with Abu Dhabi, I wonder if I can point few landmarks for you. So it's a archipelagos of islands in a sort of lagoon type of environment. So this is the main island that is called Abu Dhabi Island. This inland is where the new development, residential development, is happening. This is the road towards Saudi Arabia. This is the one towards the lane, and in this direction you go in an hour to Dubai. So this is Yas Island, where the F1 circuit is and the Ferrari World, and in red is where Saadiyat is happening. The operation was meant to boost the capital's upmarket tourism and offer 100 billion dirham investment opportunities in real estate, hospitality, and leisure. Gensler, a global architecture and planning firm, responded to the client's ambition with a plan for a new resort community which would be home to 150,000 people and a full range of hotels and attractions. The whole investment plan promoted a rather touristic and residential vocation, and the strategy culminated with an extensive cultural district proposal to establish Abu Dhabi as a prominent regional and international destination. During the press release in 2007, the ADTA chairman, Sheikh Sultan bin Taknoun Al Nahyan, elucidated the economic stakes of the project. Quote, "In all the studies we have undertaken," he said, "culture has been shown to be a strong driver for the kind of tourism Abu Dhabi has identified as its primary market: upscale, high repeated visitation." End quote. The cultural district was meant to be the trigger of the Saadiyat plan, a cultural epicenter designed by prestigious international architectural studios, charged with producing signature buildings and worldwide recognizable icons. The Phaidon Atlas of the 21st century world architecture refers to the project as the 21st century architectural Mecca, and all the other publications at that time are equally generous with superlatives. 4 museums of international caliber, 1 extensive performing arts center, and a number of art pavilions threaded around an artificial canal. In addition to that, the New York Abu Dhabi campus, Yale at a certain point was also in contention, and other educational facilities. Gensler initially suggested having all the anchor buildings protruding from the coastline on man-made circular platforms facing the mainland, a parade of sculptural objects on pedestals. The idea was presented in highly figurative terms. The sequence would resemble a string of pearls on the coastline, And in the region, pearls are a clear, direct reference to the maritime heritage and the most traditional values of the past, referring to pre-oil life. Similar figurative imagery is at the foundation of the concept for the Performing Arts Center by Zaha Hadid. The British Iraqi architect at that time described the new creation as shaped to resemble an encrusted oyster protruding from the land into the sea, with the winding and fluid form distinctive of her latest works. Now, I have argued elsewhere that in Gulf architecture, the persistent recourse to direct and indirect metaphorical reference to the past is meant to create a contextual linkage, aiming to justify its edification. Given the many foreign inputs in the design and construction process, the visual reference to the symbolic past lends greater acceptance within the local community, emphasizing internationally the cultural relevance of the region. The whole of Saadiyat Island initial vision was deeply affected by the 2008 financial crisis. Many architectural projects were delayed and several were cancelled. The infrastructure development substantially slowed down due to the budget restriction. The plan initially envisioned a string of 10 coastal pearls, but in the post-2008 version, developed by SOM and later ICOM and others, the layout radically changed and the numbers were considerably reduced. But the project continued. So Rafael Vignoli's New York University Abu Dhabi's campus is one of the first to be completed. The project's key feature is an elevated green belt connecting all the scattered volumes in a sort of reinterpretation of the New York famous High Line Park. In the same years, the UAE pavilion at the 2010 Shanghai World Expo, designed by Foster and Partners to resemble a desert dune, was dismantled, packed, shipped across the oceans, and rebuilt on the island to host the Berkeley College of Music. Jean Nouvel's famous Louvre Abu Dhabi was completed in 2018 and has been operative since then. And a lot has been said about this project, and it's also part of my research, and perhaps we can have a few words about that in the question time later. Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, it's also under construction and is scheduled for 2025. Now this picture is being taken in November 23, right before coming here, and it's hard to imagine that completed by 2025, but that's the official narrative. Similarly, Foster and Partners Sheikh Zayed National Museum, shaped to resemble the falcon wing steeps, is also under construction and share a similar timeline. New projects have been added to the original plan, such as Ajaya's Associate Abrahamic Family House, completed in 2022, and Meccano's Natural History Museum and Team Lab Phenomena, which are both expected to be finished by 2025. Now, this part of my research is also under construction, but I find it interesting to see how this remarkable cultural and architectural effort is directly reflected in the real estate market, which is the true financial engine of the whole operation. At present, real estate agents are successfully selling off-plan views of museums. The price list changes substantially for apartments with full view, partial view, or no view of museums, as this gentleman is illustrating in this video. Sorry. There was supposed to be one more pearl on the island. The Japanese firm Tadao Ando Architects was initially commissioned with the concept design of the Maritime Museum. The design phase for the museum was completed in early 2007 together with all the other museums. Unfortunately, just like Adid's Performing Arts Center, Ando's proposal was one of the first concepts to be phased out during budget restriction in the post-financial crisis. Even though the Maritime Museum remained at the concept stage, the project is indicative of how the architect interprets a specific cultural context, a state narrative, and the client's expectations. So TDIC, which is Tourism, Develop, Culture, and Investment, which is a state agency that was overviewing the works in Saadiyat at that time, officially launched the Cultural District project with an exhibition inaugurated on January 31st, 2007 at the Emirates Palace in Abu Dhabi. The photos and the pamphlets of the venue show the display of the general master plan, the cultural vision, the architectural projects at the concept stage for all the major buildings, including the Maritime Museum on your right hand. The projects were presented with written design intentions, sketches, mass models, and digital renders defining the building's forms. The exhibition's content suggests that in these early stages, architects were given general narratives and guidelines, but the museum content, the curatorial part, was yet to be developed. In fact, on the immediate following day of the launch, the Canadian International Museum Planners and Consultant, Lord Cultural Resources, announced in an official dispatch to have been charged with the plan of the content and operational matters for Sheikh Zayed Museum and the Maritime Museum. So we can assume that known or little curatorial directions pose a significant challenge in defining how intelligible heritage could shape the museum and its gallery. Or to borrow from Andrew McClellan's questions, how will a no-material cultural heritage translate into the space of a museum? The architect's answer in this case is a sculptural allegory, a reference to a nomadic culture at the architectural scale, a sail or a tent, a finite form that by its shapes appear contextually coherent and resonates with the suggested narrative of the client. The building was originally planned to encompass a 100-meter-long reflective prism dramatically emerging from the sea and carved diagonally in the lower part. The sizable triangular void resembled in a negative space a jib sail inflated by the wind. Quote, with the ship-like interior of the Maritime Museum, ramps and floating decks will guide the visitors through the exhibition space. A traditional dhow, which is that boat over there, will float over the voids of the museum's interior, featuring a magnificent underwater aquarium. End quote. The museum was designed as a system of symbols to communicate the complexity of the central exhibition theme. According to the architect, the museum's suspended volume can also be read as a bridge meant to create a meeting point between water and land, symbolizing the duality of the two antithetical but reciprocal souls of the Khaliji culture, the desert nomadic and the maritime life. At the same time as Abu Dhabi's project, Ando was also considering a commission in Monterrey, northern Mexico, a new educational building for the University of Monterrey. The UDEM campus was in expansion at that time, and the master plan destined the new acquired land to the creation of the Centro Roberto Garzasada, a structure specifically built for arts, architecture, and design school. The campus is in the city's west end on a very steep terrain found between the three mountain crests, the Sierra Madre, Las Mitras, and the Huasteca Canyon, here in the picture. The vertical rocky landscape provides a theatrical backdrop that Ando captured in the initial sketches on the Emaki, the visual diary of the project that was kept at the university archive up there. He designed the center as a 99 meters long concrete box, 1 meter shorter than in Abu Dhabi. The volume was also carved from the lower part, leaving the mass suspended on two small supports at the extremities, creating a vast cover square underneath it. The concrete skin of the building merges with the gray tones of the limestone from the surrounding landscape. It looks like a giant monolith eroded by winds, not dissimilar for the Huasteca Canyon in the proximity. The architect identified the void as the most crucial moment of the building. He investigated a sequence of different geometrical variations until he defined a shell geometry generated by two hyperbolic paraboloids notching the mass from opposite corners. Although several aspects are radically different, the building shape has an unquestionable visual affinity with the Maritime Museum. They could be considered variations on similar geometrical themes. As we have seen in the picture before, the analysis of the archival material of the two projects reveal a series of different three-dimensional studies for the subtractive volume in each building. Perhaps this results from practical consideration of the different functions hosted inside. More probably, it also represents the designer's sensitivity or sensibility to a different context. The Mexican version is more acute in its angles and looks closer to the extruded sedimentation of the neighboring geology. The Emirati version is a rounder arch, soft and suspended like textile in the wind. For the same visual intention, the volume is slightly skewed on the vertical axis, which enhances the sense of fluctuation of the mass over the water court, just like a sheep. Finally, the primary material sets the two buildings very far apart. Smooth faced concrete blocks cast out of plastic-cladded plywood molds are the signature element for all of Ando's major prominent buildings and the material selected for the northern Mexican context. An unspecified reflective cladding was meant to be explored for the marine environment in Abu Dhabi. This cladding would have complemented the natural reflection of the water court over which the building would have floated. The reflection would also complete the void round arch into a full circle. The Maritime Museum and the Centro Roberto were under development during the same years, and Ando, in his monography, categorizes these works under the label void spaces. A series of cases where he explored the subtractive operation on solid masses, such as the National Art Center in Tokyo or the Polygram Theater in Shanghai, here in the picture. The Abu Dhabi project was put on hold and never developed in detail. but the Centro Roberto was completed in 2014, is still in use, and has been my office for 5 years. Its physical presence helps to imagine how the Maritime Museum could have been. It also offers an interesting comparison of the two buildings' symbolic meaning transition during this apparent architectural transplant. In Abu Dhabi, the negative space symbolized the sail, the tent, a getaway to the sea, and a meeting point between nomadic and maritime life. In Monterrey, the void is the gate of creation, alluding to the Japanese torii, a traditional arch that marks the access to a Shintoist temple, suggesting the student's portal to a new temple of creation. As the context changed, so did the symbol and the metaphorical meaning of the building's shape. Metaphorically again, it seems that the Japanese architect, while exploring symbols of nomadic culture, ended up creating a nomadic architecture capable of recontextualizing itself from the flat desert and maritime land of the Gulf to the mountaineer landscape of northern Mexico by coherently assuming different materiality and meaning. And thank you. If you want.
I just speak into this thing. Does this work? Okay. Hi. Thank you very much. Sorry for that. I missed the beginning part, but I find this part very compelling in the end where, right, you're trying to construct some relationship between the mobility of the actual building as it's sort of, or in the architect as it sort of, globetrots, and the mobility of the symbolism or the symbolic images that are being invoked in some way, so that it seems conspicuous to me that the images that are being drawn on, or the symbols that are being drawn on to create the image, are specifically things to do with mobility, like sails, boats, ships, kind of that, or things to do with movement in the desert, sort of and are being described using terms like nomadic, right? Which I hadn't really thought about as a component of the mobility of the images, let's say, that are being produced. I wonder, could you talk about sort of that relationship and maybe what it means when architects are fundamentally engaged with, let's say, the production of images, and that those images then, there's a certain mobility across all the different forms of media, like the rendering is mobile, the building itself is the design for the building is ultimately mobile, the images that are being invoked are mobile, and then that mobility is somehow what's actually central to the real estate proposition and to all of the other ways that it gets deployed.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The image and the narrative is what we've been seeing about these projects, the whole island, for many, many years, because the construction of the Louvre actually started, I think, in 2014 or something like that. So for many years, we just seen renders. And despite the fact that the tourism authorities producing images or is circulating images of the island as one single project, all these projects are different and they are coming from different architects and different sources. So the narrative might be coordinating with the tourism authority probably, but the way then each and every firm, each and every studio is using this image and propagating this image is quite different. And that reflects mostly the difference between these actors. I mean, Ando is not Foster, and Gary is not Zayed, and etc., etc. So the type of images that we are seeing for this project are sketches and some few like more artisanal products, while the Sheikh Zayed National Museum has more renders, more 3D representation models are circulating there. I think that's also indicative of the size of these offices, which is something I'm not working on, but it has to be said. I mean, Foster has an office of 2,000 people, while Ando, it's an office that is, I don't know, probably less than 50 people working in there. So it's a completely different way to build the project, to sell the project, to articulate the narrative and convince the client. Regarding this sort of shifting sand on the island, and buildings that are coming, buildings that are going away, it's what kind of inspired me to do all this research, and I'm still trying to understand how much I can stress this concept of transplant. It's fascinating on a way, like how the pavilion in Shanghai was dismantled and physically rebuilt on the island to host an institution from Boston. It's also quite interesting, no? So I'm still cooking this. Thank you. Yeah.
Roberto, what's the secret? You press that. Just talk into it. Talk into it.
It's for the recording. It doesn't amplify the voice.
Oh, I see. Roberto, among all these monuments planned for the Saadiyat Island, are there any of a religious nature? Like, that would be churches or mosques or, cult?
There is a project that was inaugurated in 2022. It's called the Abrahamic Family House, which is a complex has 3 buildings equally representatives in terms of shapes and height, and one is a mosque, one is a church, and one is a synagogue. And but that's the only project that worked on this theme.
Could you talk actually about how that came? You mentioned when you showed it that was. You mentioned the Abrahamic house in the beginning. You mentioned that wasn't originally part of the master plan and that came in later. Do you have a sense of how that came in and why?
No. The real answer is that I don't know, and I'm assuming very few people knows when these projects are. There's a lot of, it's not secrecy, it's not that, but it's like, let's say that they are not announcing, the authorities are not announcing the project publicly until they are off ground and they are visible. So we came to know that this project was inserted when they broke ground already, and it was this. And then most of the architects, they sign a MDF, so it's quite difficult to get information out. I recently was able to speak with Gensler and have these few pictures that I showed to you, because their project, it's old and it's been superseded by other projects, but they are not really, sharing much of these. Not because they don't want, but because it's not officially announced. So that project came out as a new. Another project that came out new, and it was not in any plan that I've seen, are the Mekanu Natural History Museum that sits on the plot where the Hadid Performing Arts Center was supposed to be. And the main piece for that museum is a T-Rex that they bought at an auction, and it's the most expensive fossil dinosaur ever sold. His name is Stan. And Stan was displayed on Saadiyat Island in one of the temporary pavilions to announce the launch of the Natural History Museum. But even when they acquired Stan, nobody knew who bought this dinosaur for $32 million, something like that. So everything is kind of like played behind the curtains, and then they do a big announcement when the project is out. Same Team Labs project was not announced for a long time. Team Labs is working a lot with some temporary installation during the Light Festival in Abu Dhabi, but nobody could see this coming, and now they have a whole space for them. Normally they do installation inside existing buildings. This is the first time they are actually shaping the envelope for there. So it's
I think it's very interesting that you talked about mobility and identity. And it's one of the things, just for folks who don't know, I'm from the same hometown as Roberto. I think it's quite an interesting theme in the sense of America was built around the car, and it's all around Main Street. And here, even though it was a nomadic culture, they're choosing architecture over mobility, and how architecture is expressing this theme of mobility and how it can point to an identity. What is the urban space and the public space context around these forms? I mean, obviously in Italy we have the concept of the square. Here the concept of the square is a little bit more loose, and everything is like...
Okay, thank you for the question. So, little disclaimer, I was playing with words here, and mobility, it's also involved the fact that, people are coming and going, buildings are coming and going, technology is coming and going to build the island. But in any case, your question is relevant to the island, because when it was presented, the island was the official dispatch were stressing the fact that it would have been a place for people to walk around freely. So there was an enhancement of the public space that are normally generated in Gulf cities. And yes, the majority of Gulf cities are also built on cars and mechanic transportation more than public transportation as such. So the initial plan, despite they were like concept and render more than proper plans, you could see walkways, you could see channels through which, and at a certain point they said they were using also the Venice Biennale set up as one of the reference to organize art pavilions around the water. So there was an idea of a walkable way. Later in the new plans, this has been lost a little bit. It's still there, but they brought big highways in the fabric of the art. So these big highways are cutting the urban fabric into pieces, and now they are trying to reconnect to that. So last time I discussed this with people that are in the project, they told me that they still have, if they close all the roads of the island, they can still serve the museum through a series of underground tunnels. So if they want to close the roads for, I don't know, a weekend and have certain type of celebration, they will generate some sort of independent circulation from car and traffic. And then they are experimenting with self-driving cars and all these, which I don't know it will happen, but we've seen them going up and down the island, and yeah, it's kind of scary. But thank you.
Thanks so much, Roberto. I think that these are such enormous projects, and Saadiyat Island is such an enormous cultural project, that I think that your argument also has to be enormous and talk about everything. And one thing that I felt that the sort of echo in the background is the sort of response publicly and internationally, kind of looking down on these projects as sort of, they can't buy culture, can they? But look how much money they're spending. And then that's sort of like the echo in the press, especially leading up to the 2014. And my question, like, I feel like your argument here is this like incredible historical consideration of how what's really happening is, instead of looking, I think the Emiratis, instead of looking for this sort of like high culture that Paris or the Louvre is willing to give up in this like past, is that their future is somehow just as mobile as their past, and how the architecture in this mobility speaks to this historical moment of like nomadism, but also the sea. I feel like there's something that's like kind of, I don't want to say revolutionary, but like quietly counter European hegemony in these moments. And I think that like perhaps, I don't know, maybe we need to be giving the Emirates a little more credit than the international press has for these projects, in that there is something that is inherently, I don't know, like both sincere but also like kind of, I don't know, maybe I'll stick with revolutionary, but like thinking of culture as inherently mobile in the future and embracing that as part of their cultural past as well. Like, I think it's actually like really powerful counter narrative to what we've been seeing about Saadiyat Island. So I guess I just wanted to say, like, I don't know, this project can be louder and like say, you know, and just like really go against these kind of, I don't know, I feel like, you know, those articles about the Louvre and the Guggenheim as being like fake Louvre and fake Guggenheim, like that's not the point, right? And I think that what you're doing here is like really articulating this beautiful, I don't know, thread of authenticity that isn't the authenticity that the European critics are looking for, but it's the real authenticity that makes these actual cultural institutions, and it's not the Louvre name that is, but actually this like embracing of this future mobility, I think is like really powerful. Anyway, so thank you, I guess, like, is the question. But I guess maybe you could, if I could articulate an actual question, is what is Abu Dhabi and Saadiyat Island doing differently than the rest of the Emirates? Because there are all of these other like cultural things happening, and I do think there is something specific about Saadiyat, and I was wondering if you could just talk to us a little bit about what makes this special.
Thanks for the question. And, I'm trying to pick one of the. You know, my head is spinning, but okay. I'll start from the final, and then I'll make my way back. Are you familiar with a building that is called the Museum of the Future in Dubai? All right. So it's basically a ring that stands out from. Actually, close to a metro station, so you can kind of see it when you arrive with a coach. So that is the latest museum that is being built in Dubai, and it's a ring, and it's all decorated around with calligraphy, like at giant scale. Every window is a letter of this calligraphy that is wrapped around of all the building. That is the type of language that they are using in Dubai for their new museum. This is the language that is being used in Abu Dhabi for their museum. And here I'm not expressing any preference for one on the other. I'm trying to be neutral, and I'm trying to, my interest here in to try to understand how these buildings are built and what narratives support them. So every building in Saadiyat has a story, and I'm trying to, today I presented the maritime, but all the others, they have equally system of symbols that are combined to be accepted, to be approved, and then to be constructed and shared with the international architectural community. The museum that they are building in Dubai are way more straightforward in terms of shape. It's a shape that is, self-explained. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's a different way to communicate. The city itself communicates in a different way. And again, it's not about stereotypes about Dubai being Dubai, etc., etc. It's a decision. The city itself decides to advertise itself quick, and the message should arrive quickly. Not talking about typology or Shintoist temples moved to Mexico, like in this case. So I think the two cities are embarking in two different projects, in national project. They feel independent from each other, despite they are part of one single country, but they have their own character, and their architecture reflect that, in my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Roberto, for this really wonderful talk. As you know, I was born in Abu Dhabi, or in Al Ain, which is, there. So it's also really just fascinating to, despite having visited and also having worked on Saadiyat Island, I never really got to reflect in this way, so thank you for that. I'm curious, one of the pictures that you showed, it had the slogan where nature meets culture. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask about the nature part, and especially the Jubail Mangrove National Park.
Yes.
And how those projects, which are also very large-scale projects, and projects for which views also matter for real estate development, because I know that proximity to the mangrove park, views of the mangrove park also influence real estate prices. So have you been thinking about those types of urban and architectural interventions? How does that relate to this larger argument? Just curious. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, another fascination that I have is that for once I'm doing research in my backyard, and every couple of weeks I'm going there with my camera trying to snap some clever picture to use in my presentations, right? And this was one of those. But I have a series of these. It's actually a building site, and they are using these graphic to cover the building site. So there's one for nature, there's one for anything, basically. So the bottom part of the island is always been more natural, if you want, and the mangroves are happening there. And I should probably show a plan so people don't get lost. So in this part here, that it's showing the project from Gensler, but it's more natural than the cultural district that is happening here and the marina district that is happening here. And this is Jubail Island, where you were saying that there's this mangrove park where you can actually go and walk about that. All the coastline has been altered multiple times. And I've started reading about the impact of all these operations on the mangroves and all that, and I've also contacted a few people at Department of Biology of NYU. They are there, and to lend me some understanding of all that. But then I went on old aerial picture, and I've seen that the mangroves were not there. They were little piece. I could see pictures from aerial views from 1985. There was way more sand than plants in this area. And then apparently the mangroves have been replanted to compensate the anthropic pressure that has been put on the island. then at a certain point they realized that people cannot afford a view on the museum. They would like to have a view on nature. So that part of the island will be high-end residential, and they're mostly targeting locals that prefer, as you know, villas to flats and apartments. So there will be a series of villages of low density villas in the mangroves. And the population of mangroves actually became big recently. I mean, it's now the whole coast in that line is now, what will be the future of these plants if they have to keep planting them and replanting? I don't know, but I promise you I'll keep an eye on that.
Thank you, Roberto. I'm really struck by Courtney's comment about authenticity, and I guess I've been seeing this from the perspective of like manufacturing history, and I guess I'm wondering if you can speak to the two terms, particularly as Abu Dhabi is moving towards like cultural tourism as this economic engine, I guess. So I don't know, could you speak to like how do you manufacture the past and how does that relate to authenticity?
Yeah, we are fascinated by this need of authenticity. When we see these projects, we kind of like start questioning. But as Courtney was saying before, culture is acquired, is bought and sold. It's been since ever. I mean, half of the museums in Boston acquired their art pieces on the market. I mean, some years ago, some centuries ago, but it's the same thing. So these museums are doing pretty much the same. They're buying dinosaurs at Christie's for that amount of money to bring culture in their country. And they make they are not hiding the fact that this is not only the face of the country, but it's also a big real estate operation. They want to be sustainable from the economical point of view. They want to attract capitals and all that. If this is morally correct or not, I don't know. But this doesn't make it more authentic or less to me. And I'm trying to keep my edge on architecture because authenticity, tradition, etc., is a slippery ground, and I try not to go there. And I try to read architecture to understand how you can build this notion and this narrative of something that is contextually coherent, more than if I have to start analyzing the collections of these museums. The museums are serving the locals and the expats. They are open to everybody. They are not free and they are not cheap, but there's every now and then they open their doors. They build, the Louvre is building connection with schools and universities, and there are programs of outreach, and it will become more and more. And when there will be all operative, we can start understanding who they are catering to. Because the local population is small, and despite, everything is done in their direction, of course, but you have 95% of expats living there, expats and migrants. So, in theory, the museums are open to everybody and should represent a little bit of everything to attract them. But it's still in process, so we have to see what will be, when the whole island will be operative, what will be authentic or not.
I have plenty of questions. I'm not going to ask them. I'm just going to ask few on architecture. I'm not going to go back to real estate or what's going on there. But, I mean, can you explain, before I ask my questions, the major discrepancy topographically between your two images? Look at Saadiyat Island and what's surrounded there and what's happening in here and how close the ground has become. Is this all landfill?
No. I think is representation. This map is coming from GIS, and GIS apparently doesn't perceive the mangroves in the way it should, or the maps that have been made available are always struggling with Jubail Island here. They always show a little bit of land, but not the whole.
So maps are not to be trusted, basically.
I'm sorry?
Maps are not to be trusted. We have two very, very different maps in here at all levels. I mean, south of the island, west of the island, east of the island, everything is very different.
Yeah.
Anyway, let me ask my questions, actually, so I don't take too much time. National identity and architecture. I couldn't see any relationship between any possible national identity and the architecture that we showed us. That's number one. Number two, you are extremely generous with the architects. You're basically calling it transplant. I'm wondering, when a client pays for a design, whether you build it or not, who owns the form? And does the architect have the right to take that form and transplant it elsewhere and be paid for it a second time as their new creation? Not only Tadao Ando, who actually his building is not being built, but Jean Nouvel used the same tower in Doha and in Barcelona, the Torre Glorious. And the most important and the most notorious is IMP, used the same form for the Islamic Art Museum in Doha and for his own town of Suzhou in China, where he used the exact same form. Which leads me to the real architectural question, is what's the relationship between meaning and form in the architecture that you are showing us in here? How does meaning get to be at all something that can be related to the form when forms are transplanted, totally decontextualized, given amazingly romantic or historical or whatever it is meaning, when in fact it's the same form?
Thank you for the question.
Again, in the plural.
Yeah, again. It's not the same building. It's the same form, but it's not the same building.
Meaning is not given to buildings, it's given to form.
All right. But it's not architecture plug and play. And if we want to go back to this example I was showing, it's not the same building, transplant or transported to another place. It's been repackaged and rearranged for a different context and for a different client. Will not accept the same building.
The president of Harvard lost her position for much less infractions.
I'm sorry. And yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm still working on understanding all these, and I'm not raising any flags or defending any architectural behavior here, and I mean, they can defend themselves without me. And I'm trying to understand the process, and eventually there could be a way to sell the same building to two clients, but it's not just doing playing at two tables at the same time, but selling probably a variation on the same theme, a different geometrical, and the client wants to have something that is radicated in his own locality and in his own understanding. So all these narratives and all these architectural shape are serving this, in my opinion. But again, I'm still working on that. Regarding the idea of national identity, this is, the Saadiyat project is being presented as a project of national identity consolidation. Okay? That's why all these buildings they have these local shapes. Now, whether it is okay or not to do that, but the Falcon Tips is a Falcon Tips because that is part of the pre-oil life of the Gulf, right? Like the oyster and the maritime life, etc., etc. Now, these metaphors are floating above architecture to support them and to keep them up. But that's what is happening, and apparently they're working. The Louvre is different, for example, in my opinion. I know you wrote about that, but well, so the Guggenheim. So when the Guggenheim was announced, there were 3 other competitions for Guggenheim's museums at the same time. One in Finland and one in Guadalajara, and this one. So in this one is the only one where Gehry says that these cones are a reinterpretation of the Burjil, and all these wind towers, they are exhausting the air from inside or outside. Now, to see the Burjil in this typical Gehry complex shape, it's quite difficult. But the narrative should justify the presence of that building on the island by saying that there's something local. If you see the competition in Guadalajara, where Gehry was the juror, I think Enrique Norton and other participants, Asymptote, very different art, and Jean Nouvel, there's no reference to any Mexican Chichimeca artifacts on the art. It's a building that looks like a building, or different buildings that looks like building. There's no need to build a reference to the local past. In Finland, it's the same. I think that was an open competition, so there are more than 100 entries, and every one of them are not speaking Finnish. They are speaking with the local built environment and urban fabric, and they try to find a shape within the water, etc., etc. But on the island, there must be a representation of local heritage. Why? Right. So because there's the need in all the Gulf, if not the Middle East, to express authenticity and locality through a system of symbols that sometimes might be a bit too literal, like the other novel in Doha, for example. And in some other cases, that could be more articulated in terms of symbol. But they're mostly working on this. Please answer your question. Thank you. It's off? No,
I have a question about maybe a missing symbol in the series. Not that I necessarily agree with them, but what about the oil economy? Where is that in this island in the string of history? Does that ever get celebrated or get a pedestal?
I don't understand the question. Is that
so
the oil economy?
So we are having like a celebration of maritime history, the pearling industry through oysters, the nomadic culture, but the oil economy for the last 100 years maybe, or less than 100 years for now, let's say, also plays a huge role in this national identity, but it doesn't get any pedestal or space.
No, it doesn't. You're right. No, it's never celebrated nor put
But
up
is that
front.
because there's, I think it's, how do I put this? To the Western world, at least, it's not something to be celebrated, right? It's something to be frowned upon. We're burning fossil fuels. Whereas
which the Western world is buying every day.
Exactly.
With
So I think there's
that.
contradiction, because I don't think these are made for local audiences. I think this is made to please international audiences. Maybe some aren't, and maybe some serve them in different ways. But I think not. This is not a critique necessarily of this approach, but I think creating these symbols, I don't think locals need those symbols to be reminded of that history. I think it's painting a picture for the tourists. I mean, as you said, this project is made for that post-oil economy and surviving beyond it.
Well, thank you for your question. Well, the tourists will justify part of this project, but not the whole project. I mean, they are trying to bring 150,000 people living there. So these are not tourists. These people are living there. They will go to the museum, bring the kids to the museum every weekend. There will be tourists coming in, but whole Abu Dhabi, it's what, like a few million people, so that it's big enough to, feed these galleries every day, etc., etc. Now, they're a big museum for this population, but I think when you build a museum, I mean, the demographic is one of the aspects that you have to consider. Whether if local population feel reflected by this symbol, etc., I cannot answer this question. What I can tell you is that I'm teaching a class of exhibition design in there, and all my students, we go there every few weeks, and I ask that question to them, and many buys into this narrative. They feel that this represents them. Good enough for me. I mean, I don't want to force them to see things in a different way, but so far, I mean, it's also true that there's no big critical mass in certain areas that can stand against this type of operation. But the general people, they welcome this operation.
And do you have any comparisons maybe with the Saudi model going on now and the developments in Riyadh? Because I think there is a very big difference in the approach. Maybe they're borrowing some things from the UAE, maybe more specifically Dubai, but I think there's more catering. I mean, the Saudi audience is a much larger one as well, but I think you can sense that difference very clearly in their approach, and as well in their involvement more and more of local architects, practitioners, etc. Whereas here, the architect is like the star of the show, and I don't see much involvement of local designers, not yet. Although, and then this is a separate note, there is this like image making and symbol making going on here, but then if you look at the last two Venice Biennales coming from the UAE, it's much more rooted in like material and looking back at like tectonics and how buildings are constructed rather than these. So I think this discrepancy as well is interesting, what you're serving towards like a cultural audience in Venice versus like what you're creating as cultural venues locally. And I mean, maybe this isn't a question, but I just think it's interesting, this discrepancy.
Yeah, at two different scales. I mean, a pavilion in Venice, it's an installation that stays for 6 months, but it's true in the latest. I was trying to remember the edition before that one. What was it? I don't remember now, but the latest one, I remember that. But it's an installation, and the commissioner of the pavilion pick and choose a theme every time, and it's also in coordination with the general theme of the exhibition. I don't think it's representative of only what is happening in the country. It's also how the country interacts with the international scene, etc., etc. These are quite bigger than a pavilion in Venice, so I'm not sure I can build. I see what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure I can build a parallel between the two.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you.